Our next speaker is Grant Denton. Grant has experienced life on the streets firsthand. Once homeless, a drug addict, and in and out of jail, he has learned valuable lessons about life and how to survive, and his experiences inform the projects he creates to help unsheltered people, and I'm sure he's going to tell you more about that as he comes up. Grant?
All right, breathe with me, people. This is my first symposium. I got a brand new suit. I'm not a policy guy. I'm a homeless advocate. I'm a programmer. I'm a person with lived experience. I'm going to share my story, and I'm going to share a portion of what happens before the recovery part of it when we're on the streets. My name is Grant Denton, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Karma Box Project. It's weird I have to read my stuff about me. I should already know this. We do free pantries in Reno. We operate emergency shelters, and we do homeless outreach and recovery programming. I was addicted to heroin and meth and homeless on the streets for 9 years. So I've been in this and working in this field for around 20. And there's 4 things that I know for sure. One is that when you're saving someone from drowning, they're not going to ask you who you voted for or who you prayed to. 2, drugs don't discriminate. They don't care if you're black, white, brown, rich, poor, pretty, ugly, male, female. Drugs do exactly what they're supposed to do. And 4 is homelessness isn't the problem. Homelessness is a symptom of a problem. Like I said, I was addicted to drugs and alcohol and homeless for 9 years. And eventually living this lifestyle, if you got $100 to $150 a day habit and you don't have any source of income, you might lean towards a criminal lifestyle. And eventually I violated probation and was facing 5 to 7 years in prison. Now, when you live this lifestyle, prison is actually a retirement plan. And so you're not really worried about that. You knew it was coming. It's part of the risk assessment. And during sentencing, instead of offering me just the 5 to 7, they offered me a drug court. They gave me an opportunity, if I wanted to go to treatment and then be involved in a drug court program. And if I failed at that, I'd still get the same time anyways, so it just made sense. So I accepted the drug court program. And in rehab, I had a paradigm shift. I could talk about that all day, but I did have a paradigm shift. We all know that, I know for sure that my drug addiction wasn't as much about drugs as it was an identity crisis. Every time I stopped using drugs, I was just Grant that stopped using drugs. I needed to reinvent myself, and the treatment program pulled me out of the element where I was able to find out who I was and learn a little bit more, and that it needed to be a longer process where I got released and went to a drug court program where they created a culture of accountability, where they held me accountable, just like in the real world. And so when I got out of rehab and I entered a drug court program, I was aggressive in my recovery as I was in my addiction. And I started to ask for a lot of mentors. I really wanted to succeed. I didn't want to fail. And I would see people in these programs. I would see folks in the programs do really well, right? Guys would pass all their drug tests. They would show up for all the groups. They managed to pay all their fines. And then when they graduated from drug court, they would go back to the streets. They would go back to using again. They would be back in prison. And I was panicking. I asked my mentor, I'm like, why is that? And she's like, well, it's because of their motivation. So right now, you're in fear motivation. It's the strongest motivation, but it only lasts as long as the threat. So when the threat of jail is gone, what's going to motivate you to stay sober? And then there's incentive motivation. That's carrot and string. But the carrot's got to get sweeter, and then the string's got to get shorter, and eventually you'll have to find a new carrot. But then there's growth motivation. And growth motivation is what's going to motivate you that's bigger than you, that's going to last longer, what's going to keep you sober and keep you thriving in life that's bigger than just this. And you have to figure it out when you're in your fear motivation. I was panicking because I had about 8 months left. 8 months of drug court, and I had to find this motivation, and I was looking everywhere for motivation, and I had a mentor tell me that it would be a good idea if I approached somebody who was close to me when I was in my addiction and ask them their version of my story, and sit down in front of them and let them tell me their version of my story without correcting them, Even if I thought they were wrong, no, I didn't steal the van, it was the credit card. Even if I thought they were wrong, just let them tell me their version of my story because that was real to them. And so I picked my mom. And my mom, in her story, told me her version of my overdose, my worst overdose. And my version of it was that I went to my homie B's house. I went to the bathroom. I shot up. Now, B didn't know I do drugs. She knew there was something wrong with me. Something is not right with this guy. She didn't know I was doing heroin. So I go to the bathroom. I shoot up. I wake up 4 days later in the hospital. I asked the nurse what happened. She said, you overdosed. I was like, oh, geez. And so I grabbed the phone and I called my mom. I was homeless, but I was going to call her for some money and to give me a ride. She doesn't answer the phone. And so I did like I always did when my mom didn't do what I wanted her to do, is I started to shame her. The worse my life got, the worse of the parent she was. I didn't take responsibility for my role in my life. And I started to shame her. I was like, well, you never answer the phone, Mom. If it was TJ or Wade or JP, you would have answered the phone. You always abandoned me. Gotta be honest with you, Mom. Every character flaw that I have is a direct result of what a terrible mom you were. And I hung up the phone. And I got up and I took all the wires out of me. And within an hour, I was back behind Jerry's Nugget shooting up. That's my version of my overdose. My mom's version is different. She gets a call from my friend B, says the Grant overdose and he might not make it. My mom went to the hospital and waited there uncertain if her son's going to die or not for 3 days. Who has kids? Just imagine that. And I have kids. When she told me that, and then to get the call from me later, the next day, my mom said she didn't answer the phone because she knew I was going to ask for something. She was right. And she gets the call from me. And when she told me that, it's hard to see the picture when you're in the frame. And things like that will knock you right out of the frame. And so that was my growth motivation. I wanted to spend the rest of my life working with people like me and working with folks that were in my condition so that my mom would, and other people's moms would never have to suffer like that again. I understood the impact that I had on the world around me. It's crazy is when we're drug addicts, we're like, we're just screwing our lives up. I don't know about that, man. Somebody loves you. Somebody's getting hurt. We're doing damage to not only the community, but to ourselves and others. We have a bigger impact than we think we do. And so I committed my life to working with folks like me. I guess you would say that I am a subject matter expert at homelessness and addiction, but I'm only a subject matter expert at my homelessness and addiction. If I want to be good at other people's, I have to actually work in this field. I have to immerse myself in it. So when I got out, I started working in sober living. I worked in treatment. I worked at a methadone clinic, and I worked at the homeless shelter. And then I created my own nonprofit called the Karma Box Project. And when I first started working in this Karma Box Project, it was me by myself, and I would work in homeless camps doing outreach. Now, outreach is interesting. Historically, outreach in a homeless camp would be you walk by with a flyer or a card, and you're like, hey, call me when you're ready. Call me when you're ready. Call me when you're ready. And that's what we learned is that's more like saying, throw this away from me. Throw this away from me. Throw this away from me. And you're not going to go to a homeless camp and stick your head in a guy's tent and say, hey, you ready to change your life, man? And him be like, yeah, let me just grab my stuff. It doesn't work like that. You have to build rapport. You have to build trust. And how do you do this? Well, you solve problems with people. And so I started to clean up trash. There's two issues in a homeless camp, behavioral and environmental. And the trash is a big deal. And so I would just get trash bags and I'd come out to the trash and I'd start helping guys. Hey, man, can I help you clean your tent? And they would start helping cleaning with me. And it got to where when I was coming back, they were cleaning up their own stuff. They're like, Grant, look at my tent, man. Is it nice? Do you like that? I'm like, yeah, man, you're doing great. And we started to build rapport, and then we started to get folks off of the streets, whether it was addiction. And let's say about 90% of our folks are substance users. A lot of them have mental health illness, but it's difficult to identify what your mental health is if you're still actively using, believe it or not. And so we made a really shocking discovery is that all people aren't the same. And so we broke it down in the camp. So there's 4 types of folks that you're going to work with. You're going to work with the willing and able, Those are the guys that are ready. They're the easiest. They just need a hand up and a hand out. And they can still have the wherewithal to navigate a system. You have the unwilling and unable. Those are the severely mentally ill. That's another symposium. Then you have your able but unwilling. And the able or unwilling are the guys that are service resistant. They're just living this lifestyle right now. They're very difficult to work with. And then you have your willing but unable. And what does that look like? Unable is they're mentally ill, physically disabled, substance use disorder, co-occurring, whatever that is. And this is mainly the group we work with. We've identified 4 constants when you're working with the homeless population, and we've identified the 3 ways to help. And up until this point, I believe we've been helping the wrong way when it comes to the help. There's 3 ways you can help a person that's homeless. You can help them stabilize, which is water when you're thirsty, jacket when you're cold, or you can help them survive. Survive, water, jacket, food. You can help them stabilize, which is getting someone into a house. You stabilize someone in a house. And then you can help them thrive, which is keep the house. The problem is if you introduce stabilize without introducing thrive, they're just going to lose the house. It's get the stuff, keep the stuff. And if you do this with somebody over the course of time, this is what we found is when somebody gets the house and loses the house, and then gets the house and loses the house, and then after a series of doing this over and over, it makes more sense for an individual to be successfully homeless than it does to suck at being housed. And we had a role in doing that if you don't introduce thrive. And then you go to the 4 constants of homelessness. Let me back up. How do you introduce thrive? Well, you have to look at the 4 constants of homelessness. 1, and this is, you talk to anybody that's on the streets, 1 is that you're subject to the elements. 2 is that your things will get stolen. That's how we shop. 3 is that you're subject to violence. That's how we resolve conflict. And 4 is that you're always on someone else's property. And these things all put you in a condition of fight or flight. There's 2 things you can't do at once. You can't protect yourself and grow. Because when you grow, you're exposing your underbelly and you're vulnerable. And you better not be vulnerable on the streets because now you're a mark and you will not survive. So how do you create a place of safety? Well, we opened up a safe camp. Safe camp. And where it eliminated a lot of those things, where we can help these folks grow. It's low barrier. But the thing is the problem in homelessness, there's 4 stages of homelessness, right? You have your unsheltered homelessness, you have your sheltered homelessness, you have your transitional homelessness, then you have your working poor. And each one needs a cultural adjustment. The problem, we get folks from the streets into the low barrier shelter, and they still have issues following rules. There's such a cultural adjustment. So what we did is we created a street etiquette card that we would hand out. We wanted to start working people on the streets, start adjusting people to actually following rules, to social norms. And if you ask anybody on the streets, I don't know if anybody works with homeless folks, you ask anybody on the streets, if you ask them, I'm like, hey, would you guys agree that maybe life is kind of crappy right now? Yeah, kind of sucks. Do you want it to be a little less crappy? They're like, yeah. And I'm like, would you agree that these rules, if followed, could minimize life being crappy? And so we go, there's be discreet. Let's not crap on the sidewalks or in the wide open. Pack it in, pack it out, pack lightly so that you're not leaving that big of a footprint. This can also a stigma reduction model, because when we see homeless folks, we're like, they're messy folks. Well, kind of, but we don't have to be, right? So what if we packed light? You're always going to be on someone else's property. So if you're asked to move, man, you just got to move. And then, of course, throw your trash away. That is a QR code where I live at. So if anybody is ready to change, you just scan that QR code and it has a GPS map to wherever you're standing and every service provider around you. And it also has the link to their website so you can see the criteria to get in. And the last rule is my favorite rule. It should be the first. Don't be a dick. I had to put that in there. All right. And then eventually we move them into a camp. And when you get into a camp, the idea is that you create a system that models a system you want them to succeed in. So when they're living in our camp, we have a standard of social norms in the camp. We teach them how to be cognizant of their footprint. We start working on how to communicate with people, how to be a good neighbor. We start working on pod guidelines. Like, we want to take this pod and have it model an apartment. So when they do get their apartment, they're more likely to keep the apartment. The idea is that you use taxpayer dollars so that you can create taxpayers. This is a very, very difficult thing to do. It is not easy. I got a question. Who's ever tried to change their diet? Show of hands. How'd you do? That's just broccoli. We're talking about complex change. Complex change. It takes a lot of work. In a low barrier shelter, you don't have to be sober. You can't bring drugs on property, but you don't have to be sober. So how do you work with people that don't have to be sober? Well, you don't make it about the drugs, you make it about the behavior. For example, if the only thing that's required is you work on your housing plan. So part of your housing plan is you get a job. I got to tell you, most people using meth can't keep a job. Most people doing heroin can't keep a job, or fentanyl, they can't keep a job. So if we keep getting the jobs and losing them, then that's an inability to stick to your housing plan. And so that gives us an opportunity to negotiate, use a little bit of tactical empathy. Like, hey man, would you like to eventually have your own apartment? Would you like to be out on your own? You're gonna have to get a job. Would you agree that maybe your job, your meth use is preventing you from getting a job? And this is what pushes us to getting folks into treatment. I think it's more successful for us to get somebody, an addict into treatment, than it is to get an addict into a house. And then, you do the dance as long as it takes. The dance is where you lead a little bit, and then they lead a little bit, and then you lead and they lead, and you do this as long as it takes, as long as you're making progress. What we found is some people do the dance forever. The second you stop making progress, you're part of the problem. You might have to pivot, right? Or come up with a different solution. This is just the programming part of it, and I just wanted to share that with you to show the complexities of working with folks that are on the streets. It took a lot of work to get me out, but I wanted to mention something that happened the other day because you guys are speaking a lot about it, and I just talked to Kevin a week ago, and when I was talking to him on the phone, it was 1 hour after I performed CPR on a guy that had just overdosed, and I was doing chest compressions for 12 minutes. I know this because when I called 911, I had the phone on and I had it next to me. We used 4 Narcans, sternum rubs, the whole gig. When the ambulance got there, he still had a pulse. I don't know if you ever given someone CPR before, but it's heavy because you don't know, and you feel it. You don't know if this person's gonna make it or not. And when they took him away, he did have a pulse. And the next morning, and you lose sleep. If you want to be good at this, you better love people. Right? And if you love people, when people fail, you fail a little bit too. And when people die, you die a little bit too. The next morning, when I went to work, I saw Andy laying on the sidewalk. I was like, Andy, what's up, man? Dude, are you good, bro? He's like, yeah, I'm fine. It looks like he may have just got high. I'm like, brother, did they offer you treatment? He was like, no. I think that's a problem. I think maybe that was a missed opportunity. And you question, like, did I save Andy's life? Especially if he's right back out here getting high again. And you almost don't want to walk away from Andy because you think, like, what could happen? And I told him, I'm like, Andy, are you ready to go to treatment right now? He's like, no, man, I'm good. And I kind of worried at that second because if he would have said, yeah, would I have been ready? Would I have had to tell him to wait for 2 days or 3 days? And the problem is that often we're not ready. You keep telling someone, whatever you're ready, man. They're like, hey, I'm ready. And you're like, all right, 2 more days, you good? And it doesn't make sense. It's inefficient. We have, when you're living on the streets, can we agree that life might be traumatic? Little traumatic, right? And usually a cue for change is when something more traumatic than what you're used to happens, and an overdose is that cue for change. You have to use that. We've identified that there's people in our camps that will use Narcan 3 to 4 times a day sometimes. Overdose, get Narcan, and do this 3 to 4 times a day. So we put out these stickers, and I shared this with Andy when I was talking to him. We put out these stickers to share with folks that, like, every time you overdose, you die a little bit. There's damage done. And you might not be able to get that back, brother. You might not be able to get that back. And I asked Andy, on that QR code, there's you can scan it, and it's all the treatment centers, all the detox places. But this is all the damage that it does. And you might not be able to get that back. And right now, in this moment, of course, like Andy's not thinking about that. But I think why we've gotten this bad and why we're not improving is mainly because we're lazy. We're just lazy. There's two approaches, right? There's the bootstraps approach, get a job and get off drugs. And then there's the love them till they figure it out approach. And I don't know if you've ever been in a bad relationship before. Bad relationships, anybody? Yeah, your heart did that. So you can't let your heart solve all the problems. It's not a good idea. You have to introduce logic and reason, and it's going to take a lot of work. I tell folks that I work with on the streets, do not succumb. It's a quote that I heard. It says, do not succumb to the soft bigotry of low expectations. I challenge you because I believe in you. And I just want to close in saying that, like, I hear a lot of, when you look at both arguments, you hear a lot of folks saying, but we're saving lives. I don't think that saving lives is just CPR. I don't think that saving a life is just Narcan or just housing. Saving a life is getting somebody in a condition to where they'll never need your help again. Saving a life is living a life, helping someone get into a place where they can live a life free of addiction and the suffering that comes with it. Thank you.